Due Process, winner of 18 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2010 New York Emmy for our coverage of voting rights and the 2010 Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Best Discussion Series.
Talking about my story is a central tenet of my activism, is coming out as an undocumented student and a very aggressive, high-achieving one to put a face to the issue, to the DREAM Act in New Jersey.
A college senior about to graduate with honors. She's lived in New Jersey from the age of 18 months, and yet every day includes the possibility of arrest and deportation. The DREAM Act would have changed her life. It failed. A dream now dead or just deferred. That's next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
We tell our kids, do well in school, don't get in trouble, follow the rules, and your future will be a good one. But that isn't true for all kids who grow up here, not if they weren't born here. Instead, we're brought to this country illegally as small children. I'm Raymond Brown, and for those kids, even following all the rules, succeeding in school, can leave a young person barred from the American dream. Sandra King picks up the story.
Raymond, they may seem no different from their friends and classmates. They may have come as infants, know only this country, and feel as American as any one of us. That is, until they need a license or a school loan, a social security number, or a job. That's when they realize that for them, the American dream is very much out of reach, and it's why the DREAM Act meant so much to so many.
Educational deportation!
Educational deportation!
Educational deportation!
Educación, no deportación! Educación, no deportación!
Education, not deportation. Not just a chant at a rally, but a matter of leading a normal life or not for hundreds of thousands of young achievers whose American dream last year disappeared when the DREAM Act failed by 5 votes.
Once I am legal, oh my goodness, am I going to be working to make sure that justice is for everyone?
But the chance to be documented, to be legal, to live without fear of arrest, to be able to work.
You can't get a job, right? I mean, you can't even apply for a job at the local McDonald's.
Remains out of reach for Marisol Conde-Hernandez and all of those like her.
And the DREAM Act is just a stepping stone. There's going to be so much more that comes out of that.
But if it couldn't pass a lame duck Congress when both houses were in the Democrats' control, it has no chance now, at least for the next 2 years. So is it dead or just deferred?
Deferred. That's what I think. Because I'm an eternal optimist.
And so is Marisol.
School was my sanctuary. It's what I turned to. It was my hobby, as odd as that may sound. That was my escape.
Though when she graduates with honors from Rutgers this spring, she'll still have no chance at a driver's license, a social security number, or any kind of legal employment, and not because of any choice of her own.
My family came to the U.S. in 1988, or at least I did. I was a year old.
In fact, New Jersey's the only home she's known. Her whole life, all her schooling, right here.
I don't imagine my life anywhere but in New Jersey. It's the only place I want to be, really the only place I've been.
She knows nothing of Mexico or the border that her parents crossed to try to find a better life.
And why should we punish these kids? Because their parents might have broken the law. Why should we? I don't think that makes any sense.
And that's the question that the DREAM Act has posed for the last decade. But it wasn't until the last lame duck session that it finally seemed to have a chance.
As the son of somebody who did stand in line, I think there ought to be serious questions every time you look at a policy that allows some people essentially to skip the line and then potentially get sort of a fast-tracked citizenship.
We strongly supported it as an opportunity for young people who were raised in the United States to leave this very frustrating, marginalized, undocumented status that they're in, to actually be able to come out of the shadows and become lawful residents in the United States.
Still, just the fight for the DREAM Act brought some of those young people out of the shadows without papers or protection.
Talking about my story is a central tenet of my activism, is coming out as an undocumented student, and a very aggressive, high-achieving one, to put a face to the issue.
We need to speak out.
It just tears your heart out to see the bravery, you know, somebody like Marisol. It's heartwarming for me, you know, having seen the kids march from Florida to Washington, the sit-ins outside their members of Congress's office, their willingness to be in the media, and the response in some of those cases where some of those kids were actually picked up and arrested.
So it's no surprise that most see no choice but to stay in the shadows, like this high school senior brought from West Africa by his parents at just 7 years old.
I don't talk to nobody about it unless it's in my family, because I don't want nobody looking at me different. It's causing a lot of problems, causing me a lot of pain, because knowing that after high school, I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself.
He too has gone from counting on the DREAM Act
Changed my life a whole lot.
to fear of deportation.
If they deport me back, I don't know where I'm gonna go, because my mother is here, my father is here, have little siblings. I don't know what I would do if I go back, where I would stay.
These are kids that really want an education. They want to contribute back into the society. This helps us. When people get an education, when they get health care, they're less cost to the society. Come on, we got to take a look at the facts.
On the other side, that again, people who raise serious questions about the policies and the costs are labeled as xenophobes and anti-immigrant. But I think all of that reflects a frustration with the apparent inability of the federal government to kind of address the problem globally.
It's a travesty, a grave error of judgment, and a threat to any progress the Obama administration was making to show that they cared about the concerns of undocumented immigrants.
It can't be fixed overnight. And it's not just Mexicans, it's Filipinos, it's Indians, it's Chinese, it's Africans, it's even Eastern and Western Europeans. It takes a long time, you know, and I've embraced the struggle. You know, I'm ready for this fight. The DREAM Act isn't dead.
The DREAM in DREAM Act is an acronym. Officially, it's Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors. But to the young people who remain shut out from the promise of American security, American success, it meant access to the dream. The American dream that died, at least for now, when the DREAM Act failed, Raymond, in the U.S. Senate.
But is it dead or just deferred? That's what we'll explore with guests on both sides of the question when we come back. So stay with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think they're Americans. No question about it. They spent their whole lives here. Why not?
They came here under inappropriate circumstances. Why should they be rewarded?
It is not just discrimination, is something that is very ridiculous to me.
I think if child is growing up here, he's an American, so maybe yes.
They were going to school here, and they gave them the chance to study and everything. You know, they're supposed to, you know, give them a chance.
So I think absolutely we should grant some sort of relief to children of undocumented parents.
And we'll put that question to three experts on immigration and the law, three who approach the subject from three varying perspectives. Professor Jan Ting now teaches at Temple University's Beasley School of Law, but in an earlier life, he served as an Assistant Commissioner of Immigration of the United States. Larry Lusberg is the Immigration Subcommittee Chair of the New Jersey Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And with us from Newark, Wilfredo Caraballo, a former member of the Assembly and a professor at Seton Hall University School of Law. Welcome to all of you, all old friends. Jan, let me start with you. It seems to me that this is a position that, from an ethical point of view, the position of saying, look, here's a kid who spent their entire life in the United States, came here through no wrongdoing of their own, and now face not just great diminution of possibilities in America, but maybe deportation. From an ethical point of view, is that a difficult position to defend, that they should somehow be at risk?
I don't find it a difficult position. Both my parents were immigrants. Of course, I admire and respect immigrants. But that's not the question. The question is not whether we admire immigrants. The question is how many? How many immigrants are we willing to take into the United States every year? President Obama says he wants to cut oil imports by 1/3 over the next 10 years. Well, over the next 10 years, we're going to add 30 million plus people to the United States. We can't cut oil imports.
I do want to get to the economic question.
So
but
I'm just saying how many. The reason we have immigration laws is to limit the number of people coming into the United States, not because they're bad people, not because they don't have a contribution to make, but because we're unwilling to admit more than a finite number.
Jen, let me do this, because I'm going to ask Larry to respond to the economic argument, because it's a serious one. But from an ethical point of view, when you're talking about a finite category of kids already here, spent most of their lives here, and are not at fault in any way, does that raise an ethical dilemma within the framework of the larger immigration debate?
Well, you know, there are 12 million people who are already here, who are undocumented. It's not just this small group. So there are 12 million people who are similarly situated.
But what about the category of people who are here not of their own will?
Well, you know what? If they become legalized, they are going to be able to sponsor the parents who brought them here against, you know, in violation of American law. That's one of the problems with the DREAM Act, but unfortunately, it's not the only problem with the DREAM Act.
I want to come back to you. Let me go to Larry. I think that the one policy argument that's going to be repeated, especially in a time of increasing concern about budgets and talk about the deficit and the national debt, and is going to become more a part of every policy debate, is this question of cost. And when you're talking 2, 10, 12 million people, that is a big number in terms of its cost to society and taxpayers. How do you respond to that argument?
Well, there's two responses. The first response is the sort of macro response, which is, as a general thing for our society, it is a good for more people to be productive, law-abiding citizens who can obtain educations and can be a part of our society. Those people will be less likely to run afoul of the law. They will be less likely to fail. They will be less likely to be a drain on our economy and on our society. So in a bigger sense, including more productive, law-abiding citizens. And after all, that's who we're talking about. The DREAM Act is about kids, but not all kids. It's about kids who have obeyed the rules. It's about kids who have succeeded. At the Civil Rights Commission, we sat and listened to story after story from kids who all they wanted to do was to be included in our society after having succeeded in schools, obtained outstanding test scores, and done everything that was asked of them. Those people should not be excluded. There's a cost to excluding them. The cost to the actual paperwork that's involved in setting up the structure of the DREAM Act is minimal. And in fact, from the studies I saw, it was covered by the application fees that would be paid by those kids themselves.
I want to come back to cost, but Fred, I want to ask you a broader question, because even though you're not in the Assembly anymore, you're my guru on politics in the United States, and especially Democratic Party politics, because it was your party that had the White House in a lame duck session, a filibuster-proof majority, and a position that seems sort of apple pie and American dream that even the opponents, some of whom have been kind of quiet about who they were. So how did the Democrats fail to get the DREAM Act passed?
Bluntly, fear. The fact of the matter is there's been a lot of demagoguery on this issue. There's been a lot of misinformation. The gentleman that spoke a second ago, for example, was talking about making this an issue about overall immigration policy, when in fact it's not. What we're talking about is a very, very finite issue. And unfortunately, even Democrats wind up getting lost in the controversy of the broader issue, and they lost their focus. I mean, there's no way to say it other than that. They lost their focus, they lost their will.
Let me ask you a follow-up on the question of fear. And I know this is something that Sandy is very worried about, because she interviewed this young lady, Marisol, who was in the package, who was willing to risk all, really, to come out in favor of this package and to talk openly at a time when she put herself at risk. If you had been advising her, would you have told her to do that, or would you have said, you're going to be at such risk if this goes down that sooner or later your future may be destroyed, at least as a person in the United States, by virtue of the fear that surrounds this issue?
I could not in conscience ever tell her to do what she did. I mean, I think that's an unbelievable act of courage. I think it's up to people like me and others who look like them, feel like them, understand the plight that they have to fight that fight without putting them in jeopardy. I mean, I think she's unbelievably brave. I think others in her position are unbelievably brave, and I would never, ever advise that she come out, because unfortunately she is at risk.
Now, you didn't rise to the level of, you did in the United States government without some political skill, even though you were in the executive branch. Were you surprised at the result of the vote in the DREAM Act?
Not at all. The reality is there are hundreds of millions of people that would like to come to the United States and get an education and seek a better life. And again, the reason we have immigration laws is that we're not going to let them do it. We're going to turn them away, again, not because they're bad people, but because we've set a numerical limitation. To me, it's a binary choice. Either you say, hey, let everyone in, or you say, no, we're not going to let everyone in. We're going to set
for letting everyone in?
There is a rational argument for, there's an intellectually coherent argument, but in the United States we decide these questions by majority rule, and I don't think you can get anywhere near a majority in support of throwing the borders open, even though it would save us billions of dollars in enforcement costs.
Now, because you're so strong, I don't feel I'm picking on you, but let me repeat something that Fred said, which is that in the context of trying to talk about a fairly limited class of people numerically, that is, we can identify the children who are here, who came involuntarily with others. With respect to that limited class, are they a special category that we have the right to think of and maybe treat differently? Because it seems like there's some pretty compelling cases with the Marisols and other children.
Well, let me first say, I think it is a binary choice, and it's a yes or no question of whether we're going to enforce a numerical limit or not. Okay. Having said that, if I were a member of Congress, and I ran for Congress once, I would be willing to make a deal here. Part of the deal would be that you have to give up the right to sponsor anyone other than your spouse or your children for immediate relative benefits, and there would have to be some enforcement of the immigration system, and I think mandatory E-Verify would be a reasonable concession. I think if we got mandatory E-Verify and a concession on not sponsoring any other immediate relatives other than spouses and children, I'd be willing to deal on the question of the DREAM Act. But as a freestanding DREAM Act, I think it's a mistake. It's a violation of our concept of having an immigration law. You can't get away
Jan,
from the
you would say that there
system.
are circumstances. Does that mean that the Democrats were so stubborn that they didn't want to make that deal, or do you think that there was just a failure to understand that that was possible?
I think that's right. I think there was a failure to recognize that a deal was possible, and people were not willing to negotiate on this question.
Larry, let me ask you that. Number one, are you surprised that the Democrats missed that opportunity? Do you think, it seemed, I mean, it wasn't that many votes. There were 5 Democrats on the other side, 3 Republicans who came over. So do you think that Jan is right, that there might have been room had there been more flexibility either in the White House or in the majority?
You know, immigration issues are unique among all issues, really, that we confront, that our Congress confronts and that our governments confront. They're extraordinarily emotional, and part of that is because, like Professor Ting, all of us really are, in some sense, immigrants. I'm second generation. Some people are first generation, some are third. You know, we all have immigrant roots, and that creates in us a tremendous conflict in what we believe. On the one hand, we want to protect what's ours that's here, and some people react to that. And on the other, we want to open our borders the way our borders were open to us. To me, there's a fundamental question here, and that fundamental question is, as a society, we have never taken the position that we're going to blame innocent kids. As a matter of constitutional law, as a matter of public policy, as a matter of a just and humane society, we don't say, you kids have nothing to do with the plight you're in, and yet we're going to penalize you. And so I thought that there was tremendous rhetorical power in the DREAM Act as it was proposed. And it was not an act without teeth. There were a lot of requirements. But having said that, perhaps I and others overestimated what that rhetorical power was and didn't make some of the concessions that would have needed to be made to enact it into law.
But is it naive for somebody who doesn't have your roots in the political process to say that it seems like there's an incredible level of fear, rhetorical, maybe overreaching on this issue that tends to move us away from core issues and to not have a rational debate? Even Jan, I don't mean to say even in a disparaging way, says there is room for a debate on this, including talking about open immigration.
Yeah, but you notice how that discussion took place just now. It didn't start by talking about the rational aspects. It started by talking about the irrational aspects, numbers, borders, the right to limit. This DREAM Act starts off trying to get us to have a rational discussion. It's about kids, as Larry says. It's about kids who are now without a country. That young lady in the beginning, she was brought here at 18 months. Where does she go? I mean, she's been here. She knows nothing else. She's done everything she's supposed to do. And what she gets offered through the DREAM Act is the possibility that if she plays by all kinds of rules that are in the Act, she may attain citizenship. Or, if she doesn't do it by going to school, she joins the military and may attain citizenship. To me, let's join issue on that. If we can join issue on the fact that this is an injustice, that in fact, if there is any sense of decency, we have to deal with kids whom we've already said we have to educate at least through high school, for whom we take responsibility at least through high school. Let's deal with that. And if you want to, after that, begin a discussion about negotiating some other issues, that's fine. But that should be the starting point,
Let me do a subtle shift
not something
here,
else.
Because I don't want this to be perceived as a Latino issue, even though many of the people affected are Latinos. The young African man we had, he's been here since the age of 6, all of his schooling here, and trust me, he chose not, for reasons we can understand, to reveal his identity, but he comes from a country where it's likely that he doesn't even have citizenship because of the political controversies there. So at the end of the day, we seem to have no solution for him. We essentially say, you're a person without a home, without a right to any reasonable chance of citizenship anywhere, or at least the rights of citizenship and the opportunity to belong. Do we have an obligation to reach beyond our own fears and even economic concerns to address cases like that and there are thousands of people who have no identifiable place to go?
I'd turn the question around. Do we really want to send a message to the rest of the world that any children who come to the United States are going to be allowed to stay here and get a free education?
I'm not allowed to answer the question, so could you try mine?
I don't.
But are you discomforted by the notion of having a young man who is, even if he stays here, a burden, unable to work, without a job?
You know, if we're going to have immigration laws, we make those decisions all the time. I mean, the reality is, Larry was talking about, do we judge children? We judge children all the time on their immigration status and whether they're entitled to be in the United States or not. And that's independent of the DREAM Act. So we have to make hard decisions. Immigration law tells us that you have to make these hard decisions. And I don't think you can get away from the context of immigration law. Either you're going to have immigration laws or you're not. If you don't want to have immigration laws, let's repeal them.
We are a country that fundamentally has a deep strain of compassion. How long do you think it'll be before we take situations like this African kid, or even Marisol, who really has no other place to be, and say, we can't reject them no matter what the binary analysis that Jan offers, and I'm not saying that to ridicule it. Larry?
You know, this goes to Fred's point when you asked him, what would you advise somebody like Marisol as to what she should do? We're so grateful to people like her for stepping forward, because here's the truth. We are a compassionate country, but we respond to those individual stories. The Civil Rights Commission in the State Advisory Commission for the Civil Rights Commission listened to those types of stories and was moved to make the recommendations that it did. We can talk about policy and big numbers and principles. At the end of the day, these compelling stories are so critical to the way we think about this.
Let me give Fred a chance for a one-word answer. Fred, when in your lifetime will we reach some accommodation on these issues so we won't have these stories or is this something that will go on forever? I mean, we can go back to the Chinese Exclusion Act or even chattel slavery on the other hand.
No, let me tell you something. It'll be within my lifetime. We go through a lot of these things
You got 5 seconds.
In a cyclical fashion. And
so
I
you're
think,
optimistic?
Totally optimistic.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. My thanks to Larry Lusberg and to Professors Jan Ting and Fred Caraballo. That's it for this edition of Due Process, but we hope you'll join us next time for more on critical issues of law and justice. We hope you'll find us on Facebook and write to us at dueprocess@gmail.com. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
How do I say this? I hope that the United States can prove itself to be different, to be righteous, and to stand for the morals that we say we stand by. It's such an irony that we have the Statue of Liberty and we don't uphold those virtues and those values. I know the DREAM Act will pass, but it doesn't stop there. Once I am legal, oh my goodness, am I going to be working to make sure that justice is for everyone? Not just my parents, other undocumented immigrants, it's for everyone. For everyone.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.